Hey, it's Jon-Mark Patterson. The Reactionary Hippie's back. Can't stay away. Too many things to think about here in September 2020. The election approaching. Last time around, kind of got going on Trump versus Trumpism and sort of set the stage by saying to my well-meaning friends out there, I called them boomer friends, sorry to single you guys out, but if the shoe fits sometimes, your faith that America would rally to what you knew and there'd be common sense that would return, and all you had to do was just point out how absurd things were and how little sense they made based on what we all knew to be true. And then people, of course, come back to their senses. And one thing I'm trying to tell you is that is not going to happen. That all those assumptions that go into common sense, all the commonalities of culture and of history that you might have had a grasp of with your contemporaries, all that stuff's up for grabs. It's shattered. The institutions that you thought you could trust, the schools, the media, government, all the large corporations and intermediate associations in our country, most of them don't teach any love, affection for the United States, for the history of this country. Not even a critical affection that at least is grounded in reality. No, it's an ideological circus of fragmentation. And that's why there's not going to be common sense anytime soon. So I promised I'd group my comments a little bit. I talked about Trump versus Trumpism and why people who might have their reservations about Trump weren't crazy when they voted for Trumpism and what those ideas were, and how the implacable foes of Trumpism decided Trump was the weak link because Trumpism was so popular, so they had to attack him personally. I want to get more specific now and talk about how that's playing out in just recent months in the dynamics of the election. One of the problems I have with elite culture, the media, that cemented my grudging support for President Trump, not just because he was for Trumpism, which I agreed with, but let me put it this way. Sometimes you don't like somebody for their flaws, but you like their enemies even less for the flaws they exhibit when they attack those flaws. And that's what's been going on for me for the past 4+ years. Constant drumbeat of attack, one personal smear after another, and then the elements of the deep state, if you will, conspiring to keep him from governing. Even before he was elected, and this is all well known, I can put some cites in the notes if I need to. President Obama used the IRS against conservative groups, the so-called, what were they called? Not the Patriot Movement. Actually, there are a lot of different names, but conservative groups. Patriot was often a marker. If they had Patriot in the name, that was a 501c3 that had to be attacked. IRS was used against them, even during the campaign. It's become clear now that elements of the FBI used the FISA courts to lie, to mislead the court, to claim things that weren't true so they could secretly investigate a presidential campaign. Tried to undermine that campaign during the election. For months and years, we heard about supposed Russian influence on Trump, and that was going to be the basis for impeachment. The Mueller report came out, was so underwhelming that collapsed instantly, despite months and months of investigations and millions of dollars. And Mueller's pathetic performance in front of Congress didn't help matters. And amazingly, they pivoted immediately to Ukraine-gate, a scandal in Ukraine. And that overnight became the basis for the impeachment. Well, that didn't go anywhere either, of course. Now, one thing that's strange about that is, one theme that I think you'll see throughout my commentaries is the full-time gaslighting that goes on in our public discourse. Once the proper elite narrative is established, it is relentlessly pushed to the exclusion of any other idea. And it doesn't even matter if it's true. It's just say it over and over again until the lie is believed by most people. And even people who, based on their experience or knowledge, know this might not be true, or at least they're skeptical and they want to see other perspectives. They want to understand the significance of it. They want to know what the real facts are. Even these people start to question themselves because of the relentless narrative that pushes the same thing. So, strangely enough, you may remember this. It didn't go down the memory hole entirely. When President Obama was running for re-election, he's the one who told senior Russian officials, I believe Medvedev, the president at the time, that there'd be more flexibility after the election when he won. And it was Senator Clinton who talked about the reset. Suddenly all these things were projected onto President Trump, that he was friendly with the Russians. He was the one who was in bed with the Russians and ready to let them have influence in the councils of government. So when that narrative collapsed and they couldn't prop it up anymore, without an apology or an explanation, they pivoted immediately to Ukraine. Ukraine and Russia, of course, are deeply involved in intrigue with each other. Russia tries to prop up elements, obviously, the Ukrainian government. But who was deep in Ukraine, in the aftermath of the color revolution there? Why, it was the Biden family. And we have Joseph Biden during the Obama administration boasting openly about how he influenced government action there, encouraged them not to take action in certain ways. It's clear that his son raked off millions of dollars in a sort of no-show job there. And yet, gaslighting means if you're guilty, you tell everybody else, no, they're really the guilty ones. What do you mean? You point the finger. I mean, the Bidens were knee-deep in intrigue in Ukraine. And when Russia failed, they tried to turn Ukraine into the reason to impeach Trump. It's amazing. Nothing sticks, but they never stop. But where are we now? How's it getting more serious? Well, back in October 2019, Jeffrey Goldberg, who's probably done more to cement the final destruction of the Atlantic as a media source of any credibility, ran a fawning profile of James Mattis. And clearly there's this effort to find retired senior military, especially the ones that are well connected in politics, as consultants with defense contractors, to create a group of them that's skeptical about President Trump. And I think the reason would be that President Trump is a bit of a challenge to the traditional military-industrial complex, and the consensus that we should spend so much and carry so much of a burden and be constantly ready for interventions in foreign wars. President Trump has said he wants a strong military, but he doesn't want it used carelessly in endless foreign commitments. And you think the people who almost got us into Syria and got us into Libya and dragged us into Iraq and kept us in Afghanistan, they might have a little humility about involvement in these foreign conflicts. I mean, I'm glad my cousins came home, because they certainly were deployed often enough. But now we have the elements of the military, or former senior military officials, encouraged to say that if President Trump doesn't leave, they might have to help him. And they haven't said it in so many terms, but they've been encouraged to over and over again. And any signal from them has been amplified by the Atlantic and other sources. And this has continued up until this month. If you see the hysterical article that the Atlantic has recently published, you know it's pushing the same narrative, that the military needs to remove this illegitimate man who was properly elected from office. So what other narrative do you push if you've already pushed this idea the military needs to be involved? Well, you have reporters ask the president every day, will he respect the results of the election? And with these gotcha questions, which of course were never asked of President Obama back in 2012, with these gotcha questions constantly asked, an attempt to box the president in, I mean, what else can he say? We'll see. I mean, yeah, if it's I mean, if it's fair, I'll leave. If it's not fair, what are we going to do? I mean, he just leaves the door open because the questions are so leading and so unfair. Well, then the media jumps on this like, aha, he didn't state categorically he would leave if he lost. Lost according to whom, right? That's where we're going to go. Joe Biden might be slow to pick up on this, but he got his script. Several times, he's rather crudely said, yeah, President Bush should be escorted out of office by the military if he loses on election, or loses after the election. I guess he has to be escorted out at Inauguration Day in this scenario. I'll cite those two in comments or notes for this video. The most interesting recent result was a group called the Transition Integrity Project, which is essentially a bunch of former Obama and Clinton staffers, with a few Republicans thrown in, usually never Trumper types like Bill Kristol, funded by the Open Society Open Society Foundation, the George Soros group. I know, I'm a conspiracy guy if I even mentioned where the money comes from, but it seems to be true. They did a war game scenario where they played out different possibilities in the 2020 election. And they had, I think it was Bill Kristol and David Frum. Yeah, he still writes for The Atlantic. David Frum and Bill Kristol played President Trump. And John Podesta, infamous to insiders, former advisor to Hillary Clinton, the one who actually came down to give a sort of concession speech on election night when Hillary Clinton decided she wasn't available. He played President Biden. And so, in this scenario, there was a close election, and President Bush, my gosh, where'd that come from? Blast from the past. In this scenario, actually there were 4 different scenarios, but one was a clear Trump win. And I think they didn't have any scenario where he won overwhelmingly, but he won clearly in the Electoral College. And it was either close or Biden actually won in the popular vote count. But there really wasn't any doubt that Trump had won in the Electoral College. But that wasn't deemed legitimate by John Podesta playing Joseph Biden. So he said no, and went to states that had supported him to try to force a different outcome in the election. I wrote this down because I wanted to make sure I got this right. So here's what Podesta came up with. With advice from President Obama, the Biden campaign submitted a proposal to give statehood to Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, divide California into 5 states to more accurately represent its population in the Senate, require the Supreme Court to have its justices retire at age 70, and eliminate the Electoral College. And they said, we will allow President Trump to take office if all those conditions are met. Otherwise, California, Oregon, and Washington would secede from the Union. So President Trump gets criticized as the one who will subvert the election process. And yet, for the last year, there have been forces hinting that the military should be involved in removing him. We have this heavily leaked Transition Integrity Project scenario where even when he wins in the Electoral College, California, Oregon, Washington are encouraged to secede unless he meets conditions that will make it impossible for Republicans to win or govern in the future, interestingly enough. So he'll be a lame duck all 4 years, I guess. And that's the best scenario where Trump wins. This was followed up in turn by Hillary Clinton giving advice to the Biden campaign and saying, do not concede under any circumstances. Now, she said it quite boldly like that. It's been spun since to say, what she meant to say was, don't concede on election night, which led to the next narrative, which is, you see all these stories appear instantly all over the country, probably a month or two ago. Well, you can't trust what actually happens on election night, right? Because we're going to have all these mail-in ballots that will suddenly appear and shift the election, even gave it a name, the blue shift the election to Joe Biden. So don't be surprised, plant the seed now, if it looks like President Trump might actually win. But then we declare later, no, he didn't, because all these ballots suddenly appear. You know, I don't want to get into the rabbit hole of mail-in balloting. I mean, I live in Colorado, and honestly, I'm not really in favor of mail-in balloting because I think people should vote with the knowledge on election day, and it should be one election, not 6 weeks worth of information moments spread out. I like the formality and the ceremony of going to the polls, but it's a done deal in Colorado. In Colorado, and in I think 3 other states, I'm pretty sure Oregon and Washington, I can't come up with the other, but even if it's not what I prefer, it is a comprehensive mail-in system with checks and balances. It's been developed over time, it's been tested, it's got multiple checks. We can argue about how perfectly they work, but it's a pretty reasonable system. But that's not what we're doing now. The other jurisdictions are simply adopting on the fly a mail-in process at the last minute, essentially. I think there are incredible opportunities for fraud and distortion of the process there. It makes me sad. My favorite meme on that one has been, hey, the military votes by mail. Are you against the military? Anybody who's honest about this knows that the normal absentee ballot process is on a much smaller scale and has multiple checks and balances, and a widespread mail-in election has nothing to do with letting the members of the military out of their home jurisdictions vote absentee. Leave that one alone. Okay. Yeah, and now it's starting to get to the point where various groups are threatening demonstrations taken to the street. You know, there's a group that's already determined to demonstrate every day in Washington until the election. New sources of intimidation. It makes me sad. I don't want to see these things. I don't want to agree with those people I made fun of in my previous video who said this is the most important election ever every 4 years, because finally they're sort of right. This is an incredible watershed election, and the signs I'm seeing concern me a great bit, because I don't care just about the 2020 election. I care about America's history, present, and future as a republic under the rule of law. And I think President Trump, for all his faults, is not the one who's most responsible for trying to subvert the rule of law and free and fair elections in this country. And if you watch people, how they criticize him, how they criticize those who support him, they're showing their own flaws, their own sins in projection. Say it again. Don't let them gaslight you. Don't let them tell you who just want a free and fair election, want a country you recognize, that you're the problem. This is a revolutionary movement. Unfortunately, it's ensconced in all of our elite institutions. It doesn't like the country that we've been, and it wants it to be something radically different. And I can't believe President Trump is the keystone standing in the way of that. That's a tough place to be for those of us who deep down want the rule of law, not just of individual men. Sometimes those people arise. You take what you get. So I think we're looking at a coup, really. A coup d'etat. Not really just against President Trump, but the final blow against our institutions. I hate to say that, but I'm going to call it like I see it. Now, I've got to cut this short. The reactionary hippie, who accidentally called himself the revolutionary hippie in the last video, needs to stop now. But in the last part of these comments on the current election mood, I want to talk about the days after the election and what I see happening. And then what the results will be for future elections and how the population will align and realign in reaction to what we've gone through. So, man, Mr. Pessimist here? Look, deep down, I'm an optimist. We're going to figure it out. What we have to figure out first, though, is what we thought were we, the things we thought unified us, things we thought brought us together. They're all being ripped up and torn out. We may have to find a different way to be we, but I've got little kids, got older kids. I plan to be around for decades to come. I'm not giving up, I'm not going away, and there'll be a better tomorrow. All right, Reactionary Hippie is going to sign off now. Wish you luck and all the good things you do. Maybe I'll get back to some talks about being productive and learning new skills and looking around you in your communities and not just thinking about these big picture things we can't always control. I'm not saying it just because I'm obsessed with it. I'm saying it's important. You may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. And when the war comes, you better be prepared. And then we'll fight the battle as best we can, and there'll be something on the other side. So with those somewhat cheerful words, this is the Reactionary Hippie signing off again. Take care.